Perhaps every one of us was intrigued at school by the history teacher's stories about ancient peoples and civilizations. Tens of centuries ago, people loved, had children, fought, all so that many years later, archaeologists would find a few bricks and ceramic shards. Certain civilizations left a significant mark on the world. These ancient societies shaped the foundations of culture, technology, and governance. They thrived in different regions, laying the groundwork for future generations. The ruins of magnificent palaces and temples preserved to this day not only remind us that nothing is eternal, but also make us wonder, what will the cultural layer of our time consist of when future researchers reach it? Tablets and smartphones presented to your attention are ancient civilizations whose culture is almost lost. But the very fact that we still know about them inspires optimism. Perhaps our time will also be remembered. Only we wouldn't want future archaeologists to judge the culture of our centuries solely by the remnants of current art. Secrets of Egypt. Moving on to our first stop, it's worth understanding that the African Sahara Desert is now covered with sand, but long ago this place had black soil and life thrived in full swing. No wonder the ancient Egyptians called their country Takemet, the Black Land. The fertile soil left after the flooding of the Nile gave the local inhabitants a rich harvest. Imagine that nomadic tribes lived here as early as the 10th to 6th millennium BC. One of the oldest states on Earth was formed from two kingdoms, Upper and Lower Egypt, in the 3rd millennium BC, when the Nile was still surrounded by swamps. Today, 95% of Egypt is covered by dunes and sandhills. So what secrets are buried in the sands of the Sahara? Pyramids. The Egyptian pyramids are one of the most impressive achievements of ancient civilization, and they still remain a mystery to scientists. Research continues, and every discovery only confirms that the pyramids contain more secrets than we can imagine. The golden age of the pyramids fell on the period of the Old Kingdom, approximately 2686 to 181 BC, when pharaohs like Khufu, Cheops, Khafre, and Menkaure ordered the construction of these structures in Giza. Each pyramid was not only a tomb, but also the center of an entire complex of temples, shrines, and smaller pyramids for the queens. According to studies, more than 118 pyramids have been discovered in Egypt, although some sources indicate 238 preserved structures, including ruins. Let's start with the first pyramid, the Step Pyramid of Djoser, built around 2670 BC. It resembles several slabs placed on top of each other, each smaller in scale. Most likely, this was the intention of the pyramid's architect, Imhotep. Imhotep developed a method of masonry using hewn stone. Later on, the Egyptians held the architect of the first pyramid in deep reverence and even deified him. He was considered the son of the god Ptah, the patron of arts and crafts. The Pyramid of Djoser itself is located in Saqqara, not far from ancient Memphis. Its height is 62 meters. The largest is the Pyramid of Khufu. Initially, its height was 147 meters, but because its casing is now missing, its height has decreased by 7.5 meters. The length of one side of the pyramid is 230 meters. The pyramid was built in the 27th century BC. It is assumed that the construction lasted 23 years. Before us is not just a burial complex, but a grandiose engineering project meant to demonstrate the power of the state and the skill of its craftsmen. The Great Pyramid of Khufu. The pyramid is made of 2.3 million stone blocks fitted to each other with unsurpassed precision. And this was achieved without cement or any binding materials. Each block weighs 2 tons. The pyramid is practically a monolithic structure. Except for the burial chamber and the corridors leading to it, there is almost no internal space inside. And here, it is worth pausing at one subtle and quite mysterious point. The precision of the fit is so high that even modern engineers cannot always explain what tools and methods were used to achieve this quality. Construction technologies of the pyramids. According to Herodotus, who was the first to describe the pyramids in detail, 100,000 slaves worked on the construction of the Pyramid of Khufu. But recent data allow this to be questioned. Most likely, the pyramids were built by peasants who were free from field work during the flooding of the Nile. The construction of the pyramids was probably a kind of labor duty. Over the past 20 years, archaeologists have reconstructed the settlement in which the builders of the pyramid lived. It was separated from the sacred part of the plateau, where the Great Pyramids are located, by a wall. The village had 2 bakeries, a fish drying facility, and even a brewery. Based on the inscriptions and drawings found in the builder's settlement, it can be assumed that the workers operated in teams that even held something like socialist competitions between them. Each team was overseen by a foreman. The remains found in the cemetery of this settlement indicate that during their lives, these builders were engaged in heavy physical labor. Despite this data, the very method of pyramid construction remains a mystery to this day. It is not known for sure, for example, how the stone blocks were lifted onto the pyramid. During excavations, walls were discovered that may have served as supports for an inclined ramp used to raise blocks onto the pyramid. But since excavations at this site are still not completed, it is too early to draw conclusions. Secret cavities inside the pyramid. Using moon radiography, scientists discovered a mysterious cavity inside the Great Pyramid, the size of a passenger airplane. Researchers do not know what its purpose was. It may be an as yet unfound burial chamber or a structural element intended to reduce pressure. Notably, similar unknown spaces may exist in other pyramids as well. This discovery highlights that even the most famous monuments still hold many secrets. Presence of water channels. Research indicates that artificial water channels may have been used during the construction of the pyramids. Archaeologists have found traces of ancient Nile branches that could have served as transportation routes for moving stone blocks. This explains how the ancient Egyptians managed to transport multi-ton slabs across long distances instead of dragging them over land. Heavy loads may have been delivered using barges and special platforms. This significantly simplified construction and allowed for efficient resource management. Connection with star systems. The ancient Egyptians were known for their astronomical knowledge, which was reflected in the design of the pyramids. Some studies suggest that the layout of the Giza pyramids mirrors the three stars in Orion's belt. This supports the theory that the pyramids may have been built not only as tombs, but also as astronomical objects. In addition, some corridors of the pyramids were directed precisely towards stars or constellations that were important in Egyptian religion. This is further evidence that pyramid construction was based on complex calculations and deep knowledge of the cosmos. Interesting facts about the Egyptian pyramids. A total of 140 pyramids of various heights have been discovered in the territory that once belonged to ancient Egypt. All the known pyramids of Egypt were built on the western bank of the Nile River. It is impressive that all of their edges are precisely oriented to the cardinal directions. If you sum up the entire mass of the blocks of the Pyramid of Khufu, you get a colossal figure: 5 million tons. By the way, until the 19th century, this structure was considered the tallest in the world. The record belonged to it for 3,271 years, until the construction of the Lincoln Cathedral in England in 1311. The original height of the Pyramid of Khufu was 146.5 meters. The Pyramid of Menkaure is considered the smallest. Its height does not exceed 66 meters. It is also considered the latest of the entire complex. The Egyptians sealed countless riches inside the pyramids. Everything was placed in the tomb, from jewelry to money and household items. It was believed that the dead needed all of this to ensure a comfortable existence in the afterlife. Inside the pyramids, one can see detailed images depicting all stages of construction. The two largest pyramids were built in 2 stages. Why the construction was halted has not yet been determined. Construction methods were constantly changing and improving. The younger pyramids are noticeably different from their predecessors, despite the fact that they are located in the middle of a hot desert. The inside of the pyramids maintains a relatively low temperature, about 20 degrees. Scientists who measured the tallest pyramid found that its perimeter, divided by twice its height, results in the number pi with an accuracy up to 100,000th. So they were definitely built based on precise mathematical calculations. Al-Aziz, the ruler of the Kurds, attempted to destroy the pyramids, but he managed only to leave a small defect on the wall of the Pyramid of Menkaure. To stop the process of destruction, the Egyptian authorities banned climbing to the tops of the pyramids. Violators of the law face a large fine and deportation from the country with a subsequent entry ban. In 2025, archaeologists uncovered new secrets. Traces of hydraulic systems used for construction, confirmed in publications on BBC.com, are changing our understanding of logistics. Satellite technologies have revealed potential undiscovered pyramids beneath the sands, and robotic probes are exploring narrow shafts in the Pyramid of Khufu in search of hidden chambers. International projects, such as Scan Pyramids, use infrared thermography and muon tomography, detecting anomalies that may be corridors. DNA research on mummies, published in the journal Science, shows genetic links between Egyptians and peoples of the Middle East, debunking myths about an isolated civilization. These discoveries not only enrich knowledge, but also attract investment in preservation as climate change threatens erosion. Mummies. Tens of millions of mummies. That's how many the ancient Egyptian civilization might have left behind, according to scientists. But many of these embalmed human remains will never be examined. The mummies will take the secrets of ancient Egypt with them into oblivion. And all because several centuries ago, Europeans developed a strange fashion for using mummies, to put it mildly, not for their intended purpose. How much do you know about mummies? Are you an expert in this matter? Since in life, you probably don't often have to answer questions about them. However, every reasonable person wants to broaden their horizons and add to their store of knowledge. In short, a mummy is a body preserved by embalming. A mummy is the body not only of a human, but of any other living creature that has undergone a special chemical treatment, as a result of which the process of tissue decomposition is stopped or slowed down. Now, we would like to present to your attention several incredible facts about mummies that you will definitely enjoy. Fact 1. A mummy is the body of a human or animal that was ceremonially preserved by removing the internal organs, treated with natron, sodium carbonate, decahydrate, and resin, and wrapped in bandages. Fact 2. Archaeologists have found mummies of such animals as birds, snakes, crocodiles, cats, fish, horses, baboons, jackals, and even hippos and lions. Fact 3. The first person to describe the process of mummification in the smallest detail was the Greek historian Herodotus, after he visited Egypt around 450 BC. Fact 4. Despite the fact that mummies are almost always associated with Egypt, the South American tribe known as the Chinchorro was actually the first to practice mummification. According to recent archaeological discoveries, the oldest Chinchorro mummies date back approximately 7,000 years, which is twice as old as the first Egyptian ones. Fact 5. The first modern scientific examinations of mummies began in 1901, conducted by teachers at the English Language Government Medical School in Cairo. The first X-ray of a mummy was taken in 1903 when instructors Grafton Elliott Smith and Howard Carter used the only X-ray machine in Cairo at that time to study the mummy of Thutmose Fa. Fact 6. To protect against thieves, there is an ancient Egyptian myth warning that coffins and their contents are cursed, and those who enter the tomb will bring a curse upon themselves. Some archaeologists who discovered certain graves were accompanied by constant misfortune, while others even died under unusual circumstances. However, these curses did not prevent several thieves from breaking into tombs and stealing many precious ornaments and other valuable items that accompanied the mummy into the afterlife. Fact 7. The only organ that the ancient Egyptians left inside the mummy was the heart, as they believed it to be the center of intellect and emotions, qualities the dead would need in the afterlife. Fact 8. Most mummy pharaohs had a golden mask painted with magical spells. The mask of Tutankhamun was made of pure gold. If it were put up for sale today, its value would be around $13 million. Fact 9. Sometimes the mouth of a mummy was left open to symbolize the act of breathing in the afterlife. This custom likely led to the superstition that mummies come back to life. Fact 10. King Charles II believed that mummy dust contained the secret of greatness. He had several mummies from which he collected dust and then rubbed it into his skin. We will also tell you today about 3 unconventional ways of using mummies, as well as how mummy mania was caused by a banal misunderstanding during translation, and how colonialism contributed to it. Method 1. You can paint with mummies. In Europe, from the mid-18th to the late 19th century, there was high demand for paint made from the embalmed bodies of ancient Egyptians. Mummies were ground up and mixed with white resin and myrrh to obtain a deep, warm color. It was called mummy brown or Egyptian brown. This was part of an illegal but highly profitable business involving the smuggling of human remains, which grew especially rapidly due to the influx of European tourists to Egypt in the 19th century. Travelers dug up mummies, brought them home, and sold them to paint manufacturers. Today, it is no longer possible to say with certainty which paintings were made with mummy paint, as analysis would cause irreparable damage to the canvas. Still, there are a few works that art historians believe contain this pigment. It is suspected in the famous painting Liberty Leading the People by the French artist Eugène Delacroix. It is also suspected in many British paintings of the past. The reason is that they have surface irregularities that may be caused by the unique texture of Egyptian brown. Method 2. Mummies will make your party unforgettable. A manifestation of the craze for collecting Egyptian relics among Europeans was the practice of unwrapping a mummy, done both for scientific purposes and to entertain the public. For example, the British antiquarian Thomas Pettigrew often held such events for large audiences, and they consistently drew full houses. Pettigrew, who combined both scholar and showman, began with a lecture on ancient Egyptian burial rituals, and then unwrapped a mummy and sometimes even performed a dissection. During the unwrapping of a mummy, they often found jewelry and amulets that the Egyptians placed between the bandages to protect the deceased in the afterlife. The fate of these artifacts is unfortunately very difficult to trace. Some eventually found their way onto museum shelves, but many items likely remained in private collections. This was especially encouraged by the fashion for unwrapping mummies at private parties in Victorian salons. Method 3. You can eat mummies. You shouldn't, but you can. Probably the largest losses of the mummy reserve were caused by the European habit of consuming these ground human remains due to belief in their healing properties. The situation is made even more absurd by the fact that this belief took root because of a misunderstanding during translation. It all began with a mineral substance called bitumen. This sticky component of petroleum was widely used in ancient times in the Middle East, for example, in construction for binding and waterproofing, and also, according to Greek naturalists, in medicine for treating epilepsy, toothache, dysentery, and other ailments. In Arabic, this material was called mumia, from the Persian word mum, wax. One of the largest sources of bitumen in antiquity was the Dead Sea, from whose bottom the material would rise and could be collected relatively easily. However, over time, bitumen supplies dwindled significantly, so people had to look for other ways to obtain it. At first, only the coatings of mummies were considered useful, but with time, due to inaccuracies in translation, healing properties began to be attributed to the entire body. The powdered preparation made from mummies gained significant popularity in Europe and could be found in every reputable pharmacy. It was used to treat colds, coughs, convulsions, heart problems, and poisoning. For consumption, this powder was mixed with other ingredients, such as wine or goat's milk. At one point, the English College of Physicians reported that the preparation tasted somewhat acrid and bitter. Research on mummies. Rameses II. Rameses was also known as Rameses the Great. He is considered one of the most famous Egyptian pharaohs because of his successful military campaigns and the numerous monuments dedicated to him. During the study of his mummy, scientists discovered that the pharaoh had participated in many battles. They saw traces of wounds and arthritis on his body. The pharaoh also suffered from a severe tooth infection, which might have caused his death. Rameses II ruled Egypt for almost 60 years and died at the age of 90. It is said that he was the father of 100 children. His mummy was found in 1881 in the Valley of the Kings. The pharaoh's body was transported by airplane to Paris in 1974 for treatment of a fungal infection, and for crossing the border, he was given an Egyptian passport stating his occupation as King Tutankhamun. The mummy of Pharaoh Tutankhamun was found in 1922 by the British archaeologist Howard Carter. It was discovered in the Egyptian Valley of the Kings. The tomb had been robbed several times, but the burial chamber was filled with jewels, ornaments, gilded sacred items, and treasures. A funerary mask made of pure gold was also found there. This discovery sparked a worldwide wave of Egyptology fever. For decades, scientists debated whether the boy king had been murdered, but during the examination of the body, it became known that the pharaoh died from injuries he received while hunting. lost technologies. For centuries, the world has admired the majestic structures of ancient Egypt, from the magnificent Great Pyramids to the enigmatic Sphinx, the temples of Karnak and Luxor, as well as the mystical Hippogeum of Saqqara. These architectural wonders have puzzled historians, archaeologists, and engineers. We will immerse you in the lost technologies of ancient Egypt, revealing the advanced engineering methods that allowed the construction of these iconic monuments. The mysterious technologies of the Sphinx. The Sphinx, with its unique combination of a lion's body and a human head, has sparked much debate over the years. Many believe that it predates the commonly accepted chronology of ancient Egyptian history and may point to an earlier civilization that is still unknown. We will examine these debates about its age, origin, and potential existence in greater detail. Diving into this fascinating topic, theories about its construction. The Sphinx is an iconic symbol of ancient Egypt, and the technique used to carve and shape it remains a subject of admiration. Did the Egyptians possess advanced stone carving methods or tools that have since been lost to history? This question has intrigued archaeologists for centuries, giving rise to various theories, including one suggesting that the cause was water erosion. The Karnak Temple, the colossal columns, and their precision, the majestic columns of Karnak, are a testament to ancient engineering mastery. And it is astonishing how precisely they were quarried, transported, and installed. The stones used in the columns were likely obtained from local limestone quarries that had been developed centuries earlier. After these massive stones were cut into large blocks at the quarry site, they were transported by river barges or overland using wooden sledges pulled by pairs of oxen before being carefully placed in their positions. The precision with which each block was installed demonstrates the impressive level of skill of those involved in this monumental project. Lighting methods used in antiquity. The Luxor Temple is a stunning example of ancient Egyptian architecture, whose beauty shines even in darkness. The Egyptians used oil lamps to illuminate their temples, which were made of clay or stone and filled with animal fat. These lamps were placed throughout the temple complex to provide light for religious ceremonies. Lighting was an important part of many Egyptian rituals. It symbolized the life-giving energy of the gods, which connected worshippers with divine power. Therefore, lighting was essential for performing these sacred rites within the temple walls and allowed the Egyptians to honor their deities in various ways, both at night and during the day. The alignment of the Luxor temple with celestial events has been carefully studied to determine whether it was intentional. By examining the connections between ancient Egyptian beliefs and their architectural choices, it becomes clear that many of these alignments were deliberate. The ancient Egyptians believed in a cyclical view of time and considered the sun an important symbol of rebirth and regeneration, which explains why so many temples align with solstices or equinoxes. This alignment also reflects their views on cosmic order and balance. something that was considered crucial for maintaining harmony in life. Thus, it is very likely that these alignments in the Luxor temple were indeed an intentional reflection of ancient Egyptian beliefs about cosmic order and renewal through solar cycles. Obelisks. The creation of obelisks was an outstanding engineering feat. The ancient Egyptians used various methods to carve these monumental monoliths, such as copper chisels and hammers to shape the stone. To move them into place, they used teams of workers and sledges pulled by oxen or other animals. The massive stones were then either dragged on rollers or lifted using levers before being set in their final position. This incredible achievement required great skill and determination from the engineers, who had to not only create but also transport these impressive monuments over great distances for centuries without modern technology. Obelisks were an important part of ancient Egyptian culture and religion. During ceremonies, obelisks served as symbols of power and divinity, embodying the presence of the gods in temples or other sacred places. The symbolism of these majestic structures was also significant. They often represented the rays of the sun, god Ra, reaching the earth, uniting heaven and earth. The mysterious Lake Moeris. Lake Moeris, an ancient reservoir located in the Nile Valley, is a testament to the engineering and water management skills of its creators. It was created by Pharaoh Amenemhat III during his reign in the 12th dynasty, 1855-18 odd BC. The lake served various functions, including providing irrigation for agricultural crops and offering fishing as a food source. Its construction also helped control flooding along the Nile by storing excess water during high flow. Lake Moeris serves as an example of how effective engineering and water management could benefit the local population even thousands of years ago. The purpose of Lake Moeris has been the subject of debate among scholars for centuries. Various theories suggest that the lake was used for irrigation, flood control, and other purposes. In this analysis, we will evaluate these hypotheses and their significance for ancient Egyptian civilization. Hieroglyphic writing as a form of technology. The complex hieroglyphic writing system used by the ancient Egyptians was a remarkable technological achievement and has provided us with invaluable insight into their culture. It is believed to have evolved over time from an early picture-based form of writing known as hieratic, which itself dates back to around 30 to 200 BC. By combining symbols representing sounds, objects, or ideas in different combinations, hieroglyphs allowed for complex communication that could be understood by both literate and illiterate readers. The significance of the Rosetta Stone. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone in 1799 was a groundbreaking moment in history, as it allowed scholars to finally decipher ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. The stone provided an invaluable key to unlocking this mysterious script, which had remained largely undeciphered for centuries. It contained three scripts: hieroglyphic, Demotic, and Greek, all versions of the same decree issued by King Ptolemy V Epiphanes in 196 BC. By comparing these different scripts with one another, scholars were able for the first time to identify specific symbols and their meanings in hieroglyphs, thereby paving the way for a complete understanding of ancient Egyptian culture and language, something that would have been impossible without this remarkable artifact. Mesoamerica. Avocado, tomato, and chocolate. You are probably familiar with at least some of these products. Did you know that they all come from Mexico and are based on words from the Nahuatl language, ahuacatl, tomatl, and choclatl, which were later adopted into English? Nahuatl is the language spoken by the Nahua ethnic group living in Mexico today, but it has deep historical roots. You may know one Nahua group, the Aztecs, who are more accurately called the Mexica. The Mexica were one of many Mesoamerican cultural groups that flourished in Mexico before the arrival of Europeans in the 16th century. Where was Mesoamerica? Mesoamerica refers to the diverse civilizations that shared similar cultural characteristics in the geographic regions spanning the modern countries of Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Belize, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. Some shared cultural traits among Mesoamerican peoples included a complex pantheon of deities, architectural features, the ball game, the 260-day calendar, trade, food, especially the reliance on corn, beans, and squash, clothing, and accessories, additional items a person wears or uses, such as ear spools. The Maya. The Maya were a civilization in Central America that existed approximately from 1500 BC until the Spanish conquest in the 16th century AD. The ancient Maya civilization was so highly developed that it continues to amaze the world to this day. The Maya are one of the most brilliant civilizations of pre-Columbian America. It is a mystery culture, a phenomenon culture, full of contradictions and paradoxes. It generated a huge number of questions, and not all of them have answers. Living practically in the Stone Age, they did not know metals until the 10th century AD, nor wheeled carts, the plow, pack, or draft animals. The Maya created an accurate solar calendar, the most complex hieroglyphic writing system, used the concept of zero earlier than the Arabs and Indians, predicted solar and lunar eclipses, calculated the movements of Venus with an error of only 14 seconds per year, and achieved significant mastery in architecture, sculpture, painting, and ceramic production. They worshipped their gods and at the same time submitted to kings and priests, building temples and palaces under their guidance, performing ritual ceremonies, offering themselves as sacrifices, and waging wars with their neighbors. The Maya created remarkable cities built solely by manual labor. Interestingly, almost all cities of the classic period show traces of violent destruction. The names of many Maya cities and individual structures were given to them after the Spanish conquest and are not their original names. For example, Tikal was invented by archaeologists, and Palanque means fortress in Spanish. Archaeologists often have to speculate and reconstruct much on their own. It is unlikely that we will ever know exactly what happened then or how these mysterious and exotic Indians lived. But this does not stop enthusiastic scholars. And every year, we come at least a little closer to unraveling the mysteries of the Maya civilization. The calendar, developed by the Maya, was also used by other Central American peoples. It was the Maya who used a hieroglyphic writing system, which today is only partially deciphered. Their numerous inscriptions on monuments have been preserved to this day. The Maya created an effective agricultural system and had deep knowledge of astronomy. The descendants of the ancient Maya include not only modern Maya peoples who have preserved the language of their ancestors, but also part of the Spanish-speaking population of the southern states of Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras. Several Maya cities are included in the UNESCO World Heritage List: Palenque, Chichen Itza, Uxmal in Mexico, Tikal and Quirigua in Guatemala, Copan in Honduras, Joya de Cheren in El Salvador, a small Maya village buried under volcanic ash and now excavated. According to legends, the Maya came to the territory of present-day Mexico from Honduras and Guatemala. The rapid and large-scale growth of their cities leads to a clear conclusion. By the time they arrived here, the Maya already had a unified and ancient culture. The new Maya territory had the shape of a triangle, with its corners formed by the cities of Huasactun, Palenque, and Copan. Other centers that arose later were located along the sides of the triangle and within it. At that time, another specific feature of the Maya became apparent. Land expansion proceeded from the periphery toward the center, and not the other way around, as everywhere else. Of all the ancient cultures that flourished in North and South America, only the Maya had a developed writing system, and it was at this time that Maya hieroglyphic writing began to develop. Maya hieroglyphs resemble miniature drawings pressed into tiny squares. In reality, these are units of written language, one of the 5 original writing systems created independently of each other. Some hieroglyphs are syllabic, but most of them are ideograms that denote phrases, words, or parts of words. The hieroglyphs were carved on stelae, on lintels, on the vertical planes of stone stairways, on the walls of tombs, and also written on the pages of codices and on clay vessels. About 800 hieroglyphs have already been read, and scientists continue with undiminished interest to decipher new ones, as well as to offer new interpretations of already known symbols. During this same period, temples were built and decorated with sculptural images of gods, and later of Maya rulers. In the tombs of Maya rulers from this period, rich offerings are found. Beginning in the 3rd century BC, rulers endowed with supreme power built temple pyramids and stelae with images and inscriptions meant to immortalize their reign. The dedication ceremony consisted of a bloodletting ritual and human sacrifices. The oldest known stela, dated to 292 BC, was found in Tikal. It was erected in honor of one of the heirs of the ruler Yax'eb-Suk-Tutun, who founded the dynasty at the beginning of the century, a dynasty that remained in power for 600 years. In 378 BC, under the 9th ruler of this dynasty, the great Jaguar Paw, Tikal subdued Huasactun. At that time, Tikal was under the influence of a tribe of warriors and merchants from the Mexican center of Teotihuacan, having adopted from the foreigners certain methods of warfare, the exhaustion of natural resources, the decline of agriculture, overpopulation of cities, epidemics, external invasions, social unrest, and unending wars. All of this, either together or separately, could have caused the decline of the Maya civilization in the southern lowland regions. By 900 AD, construction in this territory ceases, and once populous cities, abandoned by their inhabitants, turn into ruins. But Maya culture still lives in the northern part of Yucatan. Beautiful cities such as Oxmal, Kabah, Sail, and Labna in the mountainous Book region existed until about 1000. Today, the area inhabited by the Maya spreads across 5 countries: southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. And their heritage comprises about 6 million people. Of course, they no longer live in a mighty empire, but they are determined not to forget the traditions of their ancestors. They have preserved their traditional culture. They practice agriculture, salt production, and fishing, and work on coffee plantations. Some women take jobs as domestic workers in cities. Among modern Maya, beekeeping, poultry farming, and livestock raising, cows, pigs, horses, goats, donkeys, sheep, are developed. Certain crafts remain: pottery, embroidery, weaving, carpentry, wood carving, and in the mountains, patterned weaving, the production of ornaments, musical instruments, roof tiles, and boats, rectangular dwellings made of poles, reeds, and straw, with high roofs covered with palm leaves, often whitewashed inside and out, predominate. Traditional clothing is used on holidays. Men and women wear patterned belts, and women also wear white skirts and cloaks. Pre-Christian cults and beliefs are closely intertwined with Catholicism. The cult of mountains, caves, wells, the cross, agrarian and funerary rituals, shamanism, magic, and folk healing. Ancient Maya calendars are used in rituals. Their mythology, songs, legends, tales, and dances have been preserved. The Maya language existed until it was banned by the church in the 16th century. And today, the Maya do not even have a single common language. Not even all of them speak Spanish, which is the official language of the countries in which the Maya live. The Maya linguistic family includes more than 24 living languages. Some, for example, Mocho, are on the verge of extinction, while others, like Kakchakal, are thriving. Modern Maya use writing based on the Latin alphabet. The decline of the Maya civilization as early as the 9th century AD in the southern regions inhabited by the Maya. There was a rapid decrease in population in Yucatan. Cities were abandoned by their inhabitants, and water supply systems fell into decay. From the mid-10th century AD onward, no more stone structures were built. To this day, the disappearance of the Maya civilization remains a subject of scholarly debate. At the same time, there are 2 main viewpoints regarding the disappearance of the Maya civilization. the ecological and non-ecological hypotheses. The ecological hypothesis is based on the balance of relations between humans and nature. Over time, this balance was disrupted. The constantly growing population faced the problem of a shortage of high-quality soils suitable for agriculture, as well as a lack of drinking water. However, most researchers doubt the correctness of this version. The assumption that climate change, especially drought, caused the crisis of the Maya civilization is proposed by the geologist Gerald Hogg, who studies climate change issues. Some scholars also associate the collapse of the Maya civilization with the fall of Teotihuacan in central Mexico. Some researchers believe that after Teotihuacan was abandoned, creating a power vacuum that affected Yucatan as well, the Maya were unable to fill this vacuum, which ultimately led to the decline of their civilization. Aztecs. The Aztecs were the largest indigenous people of Mexico, who came into the central part of the country from the north in the 12th century. Another authentic name for the Aztecs is the Mexica. It is believed that in 1325, they began building their capital, Tenochtitlan, on the site of modern Mexico City. Tenochtitlan gradually became the capital of an empire that stretched far beyond the boundaries of the Mexican Valley. According to their own legend, the Aztecs came to the Mexican Valley from a place called Aztlan, hence the name of the people. Aztec culture had a wide and complex network of mythological and religious traditions, highly developed art, and deep knowledge in various fields of science. The Aztecs of the imperial era spoke the Nahuatl language, which is commonly referred to as Classical Nahuatl. The Aztecs created a large number of their own literary works, most of which were destroyed during and after the conquest. The Aztec Empire was destroyed during the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs. The invasion of the Spaniards, led by Hernán Cortés in 1521. Several powerful epidemics of the 16th century, the so-called Coccolistli epidemics, played a major role in this, causing the deaths of 22–25 million Aztecs. The Aztec Empire, similar to most European empires, was ethnically very diverse. It was rather a unified tribute collection system than a unified system of governance. In this context, Arnold Toynbee draws an analogy with the Assyrian Empire. Although cities under Aztec rule were heavily taxed, excavations show a steady improvement in the well-being of ordinary people after these cities were subordinated to the center. Trade was carried out even with enemy cities. The only people who defeated the Aztecs, the Purepecha, were the main producers of copper axes. The main contribution of the Aztecs to administrative development was the communication system between conquered cities. In Mesoamerica, there were no draft animals and no wheeled vehicles, and roads were built for foot travel. Usually, road construction was financed through a portion of the tribute. The roads were constantly maintained, so even women could travel alone. Travelers could rest and eat in special places, arranged every 10–15 kilometers. Messengers, Painani, traveled these routes continuously, keeping the Aztecs informed of the latest events. The creation of the Aztec Empire led to one of the largest demographic booms. The population of Mesoamerica increased from 10 to 15 million people. Religion. The Aztecs believed in many gods and considered themselves a chosen people. According to legend, the gods who once gathered in Teotihuacan sacrificed themselves to illuminate the world. To restore the cosmos, the Aztecs constantly offered human sacrifices to the gods, trying to prevent the return of darkness. The ceremony took place at the top of the great temple on a sacrificial stone. Those who were sacrificed could be prisoners of war, captured during the Flower Wars, slaves, or chosen representatives of the Aztecs. The sacrifices had economic and political functions. They were meant to ensure the regular return of rain to agricultural lands, as well as preserve Aztec dominance through the physical destruction of enemies. These rituals horrified the Spaniards, who, as Catholics, interpreted sacrifices as perversion and evil rather than as a sacred act. Education. Boys entered school at the age of 15. There were two types of educational institutions. In the schools called Telpochkali, they studied history, religion, military skills, and also trade or crafts, agrarian or artisan. In the Kalmakak schools, which were attended mostly by the sons of the Pile, the focus was on training leaders, Tlatok, priests, scholars, and teachers, Tlatimini, and scribes, Tlaquilo. They studied rituals, literacy, calendrics, poetry, and martial arts. Girls were taught mainly household crafts and child-rearing skills. They were not taught to read and write. For gifted children, there were two main opportunities. Some were sent to the house of songs and dances, and others to the house of the ball game. Both types of activities had high social prestige. The descendants of the Aztecs still live today, but their vast empire remains in the distant past. It was truly astonishing for its time. Its people managed to reach significant heights in science, although at the same time, some seemingly elementary things were unknown to Aztec sages. In any case, the star of the Aztecs finally set when their already weakened and gradually declining empire shattered under the crushing blow of the Spanish conquerors. Interesting facts about the Aztecs. They created floating islands on Lake Texcoco, on which they then grew agricultural crops. The Aztecs built huge pyramids comparable in size to Egyptian ones. Cocoa beans served as a form of money for the Aztecs. Among Aztec warriors, poetry was considered a noble and useful occupation. All festivals in the Aztec Empire were accompanied by sacrifices, including human sacrifices, and there were always enough volunteers to play the role of the victim. Once, during a festival that lasted 4 days, about 20,000 people were sacrificed. Before the Aztecs, there was another people in the territory their empire later occupied, the Toltecs. According to Aztec legends, it was from the Toltecs that they learned all their knowledge. They were knowledgeable in medicine. Historians agree that in this field, their level of development corresponded to that of the ancient Greeks and Romans. Gambling was very popular in the Aztec Empire. Some Aztecs even gambled themselves into slavery, unable to cope with their own passion. Prisoners captured in war were turned into slaves, but slavery was not inherited. A child born to a slave mother was free. Even slaves themselves had the right to buy their freedom or receive it for free if they could prove that their master was cruel to them. By the time they encountered the Spanish conquistadors, the Aztec Empire covered a vast area from the Pacific coast to the Gulf of Mexico. About 1/5 of the entire population of the empire was engaged in agriculture. This is not much, considering their primitive technologies, but the Aztecs never experienced famine thanks to well-established trade connections. Military valor among the Aztecs was measured by the number of prisoners captured. Killed enemies were valued far less than those taken alive. The equivalent of nobility among the Aztecs was not hereditary for centuries. It could be earned only through personal merit. Later, the system was changed. The Aztecs expanded their territories by conquering other cities, but instead of plundering them, they included them in the empire. Interestingly, archaeologists believe that after transitioning under Aztec rule, the standard of living in the conquered cities increased. Today, about 1.5 million ethnic Aztecs live in the world. Most of them reside in Mexican territory. Translated from the Aztec language, the title of the head of the empire meant approximately great speaker. After the arrival of Europeans, an epidemic of typhus broke out among the Aztecs, and they did not know how to fight it. So about 15 million people, that is 4.5 of this population, died in the 16th century. The average life expectancy of the Aztecs slightly exceeded 40 years. Descendants of the Aztecs in the modern world are called Nahua. Snakes were considered tasty and useful food by this people. Olmecs. The Olmecs had many achievements. They developed a number system, a calendar, and a pictographic writing system. They produced clay pottery and small jade sculptures. They traded these items with other groups. The Olmec civilization is what is known as an archaeological culture. This means that there is a collection of artifacts that archaeologists believe represent a particular society. What is known about archaeological cultures is based on artifacts rather than texts. In the case of the Olmecs, archaeologists believe that artifacts found mainly in the northern half of the Tehuantepec Isthmus in Mesoamerica between 1200–500 BC represent the Olmec society. The name Olmecs was actually invented by scholars, derived from the Nahuatl, Aztec word Olmecatl, meaning inhabitant of the land of rubber. The term Olmecs refers to rubber production in the region where many artifacts were found. Research at these and other sites has led to the following conclusions. The Olmec diet initially included foods obtained through fishing and hunting. Corn and other crops were added to their diet later. The Olmecs created massive monuments, including colossal stone heads, thrones, stelae, vertical slabs, and statues. They may have been the originators of the Mesoamerican ball game, a ceremonial team sport played throughout the region for centuries. They also built earthen mounds and pyramids, as well as several types of ceramics, which became widespread across the region influenced by the Olmec civilization. The Olmec civilization was one of the most influential ancient civilizations of early America, and although its dominance in the region disappeared in the last centuries BC, the Olmecs are often considered the mother culture of many other cultures that later appeared in the region. These cultures, such as the Maya, Zapotec, Totonac, and Teotihuacan civilizations, have unique art, architecture, and cultures that distinguish them from one another. But many historians trace them all back to their shared Olmec heritage. Religion and deities of the Olmec culture. Available evidence indicates that the Olmec culture was deeply religious. Olmec art contains depictions of a large number of supernatural beings, suggesting that this was a polytheistic society with deities associated with agriculture, stars, volcanoes, and other aspects of the natural world and the cosmos. The Olmecs also worshipped animals they considered sacred, such as the jaguar, which gave rise to the so-called word jaguars, beings that were half feline and half human. They also worshipped frogs, caimans, eagles, snakes, sharks, and various creatures depicted with the head of one animal and the body of another. It is believed that this was a dynastic religion, meaning it directly linked its rulers with the gods, as if they were their descendants. Olmec clothing. Judging by the preserved figurines and other artistic depictions, the Olmecs wore lightweight clothing made of cotton or other plant fibers. They also used various forms of personal adornment, depending on their occupation and position in the social hierarchy. Feathers, septum piercings, nose rings, earrings, and pectoral ornaments were common among some men, especially warriors and rulers. Rulers could also wear headdresses or helmets. Women could wear ear ornaments, hairstyles, and headdresses that emphasized their social status, as well as upper garments such as the huipil and quechquemitl with skirts underneath. The Olmecs were the first to use a magnetic compass in Mesoamerica. A magnetite bar found in La Venta likely served to orient structures. Around 400 BC, the Olmec centers began to decline. San Lorenzo was destroyed, La Venta was abandoned, and Tres Zapotes lost its importance. Why did this happen? Scholars propose several hypotheses, each adding a piece to this puzzle. Environmental changes. Excessive agriculture may have depleted the soils, and climate changes such as droughts disrupted agriculture. Internal conflicts. Archaeological findings, such as destroyed sculptures, indicate possible uprisings or internal wars. External invasions. Neighboring tribes may have attacked weakened centers, although there is little evidence for this. Despite the decline, the Olmecs did not disappear without a trace. Their ideas, art, and religious traditions were adopted by other cultures. The Maya, the Zapotecs, and the Aztecs borrowed elements of Olmec culture, making them heirs to this great civilization. Today, the Olmecs continue to captivate the imagination of researchers and tourists. Their colossal heads adorn museums and archaeological sites like La Venta have become popular tourist attractions. But their influence extends far beyond physical artifacts. The Olmecs laid the foundations for the Mesoamerican cultural tradition. Their calendars, writing, architecture, and religious concepts became the basis for the civilizations that came after them. For example, the famous Maya calendar is partially based on Olmec developments. Even modern Mexicans take pride in their Olmec heritage, considering it part of their national identity. Research on the Olmecs continues, and each new discovery reveals something new about this mysterious civilization. Perhaps somewhere in the jungle, there are still undiscovered sculptures or temples that will tell us more about those who stood at the origins of Mesoamerica. Babylon and Mesopotamia. For a very long time, this civilization remained almost unknown to science. The main source of knowledge was the Bible, which contains stories about the construction of the Tower of Babel, about King Nebuchadnezzar and the captivity of the Jews, about the Chaldeans, the inhabitants of Babylon, about the capital of Assyria, Nineveh, the great harlot, about the bowls of wrath that 7 angels poured over the lands along the Euphrates. Descriptions of these places are also found in the works of the ancient Greek historian Herodotus. He admired the walls of Babylon, so wide that 2 war chariots could pass each other on them, and counted the hanging gardens of Semiramis among the wonders of the world. Such accounts long seemed doubtful because it was unclear how such a great civilization could have disappeared. In the 19th century, grand archaeological discoveries took place in the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates. The major cities of Mesopotamia were excavated, and their writing system was deciphered, which made it possible to reconstruct the past of the Two Rivers region in considerable detail. Babylon. The city of Babylon on the Euphrates River in southern Iraq is mentioned in documents from the late 3rd millennium BC and first became known as the royal city of King Hammurabi. He established control over many other kingdoms, stretching from the Persian Gulf to Syria. The British Museum holds one of the iconic artworks from this period, the so-called Queen of the Night. Babylonia had complicated relations with its northern neighbor Assyria and opposed its military expansion. In 689 BC, Babylon was looted by the Assyrians, but since the city was of great value, it soon regained its former status. Other Babylonian cities also flourished. Scribes in the city of Sippa likely created the famous map of the world. Unlike many cities that perished and disappeared, Babylon was resilient, rising again and again from its own ashes, even as new conquerors invaded and seized it. However, the pleasure its occupiers took in possessing the city came at a price, for desirable Babylon was always seen as a prize to be taken. Babylon has resonated in Judeo-Christian culture for centuries. The books of the Old Testament describe the exile of the Jews to Babylon after the sack of Jerusalem, by the waters of which they sat and wept. By the time of the New Testament, the city had become a powerful symbol, the corrupt, earthly twin of the pure, heavenly New Jerusalem. Outside the biblical tradition, Babylon fascinated Greek and Roman writers who contributed to the rich collection of legends that have survived to this day. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote about Babylon in the 5th century BC. A number of inconsistencies in his account have led many scholars to believe that he never visited the city, and that his text may be based more on hearsay than historical fact. Popular stories of Babylon's fantastic structures, such as the Tower of Babel and the Hanging Gardens, may also be products of legend and confusion. Yet for historians and archaeologists, Babylon is a real brick-and-mortar site at the heart of a vibrant Mesopotamian culture, which it dominated for so many centuries. Babylon first rose to prominence at the end of the Bronze Age, around the beginning of the 2nd millennium BC, when it was inhabited by a people known as the Amorites, a series of strong Amorite kings, including King Hammurabi, famous for compiling the world's first legal code, allowed Babylon to eclipse the Sumerian capital of Ur as the most powerful city in the region. Although Babylon declined after Hammurabi's death, its importance as the capital of southern Mesopotamia, now known as Babylonia, continued for millennia. The Babylonians themselves were acutely aware of the great antiquity of their civilization. One of Nebuchadnezzar's successors, Nabonidus, is now known to modern historians as the archaeologist king. Being a scholarly man, he revived the ancient architectural and cultural traditions of the region, particularly those of the Akkadian Empire, which had dominated Mesopotamia in the 3rd millennium BC, a period that from the viewpoint of his own era already seemed like a distant past. Babylon reached its height in the 7th and 6th centuries BC, when it was considered the largest city in the world. A new dynasty, founded by a tribe known as the Chaldeans, seized control from the Assyrians in the early 600s BC. The second ruler of the Chaldean line became famous for both cruelty and splendor. Nebuchadnezzar II, the king who sacked Jerusalem and brought the captive Jews to the capital of his new and increasingly powerful regional empire. A successful military leader, Nebuchadnezzar used the wealth he obtained from other lands to rebuild and glorify Babylon. He completed and reinforced the city's defenses, including digging a moat and constructing new city walls. Beautification projects were also on the agenda. The magnificent processional way was paved with limestone. Temples were repaired and rebuilt, and the glorious Ishtar Gate was constructed, built of cobalt blue glazed bricks and decorated with bulls and dragons. The city gate bears an inscription attributed to Nebuchadnezzar. I placed wild bulls and ferocious dragons in the gates and thus adorned them with lavish splendor, so that people might gaze upon them in wonder. Babylonian citizens considered their city a paradise, the center of the world, and a symbol of cosmic harmony that arose when its supreme deity, the god Marduk, defeated the forces of chaos. The spread of the cult of Marduk throughout Mesopotamia was proof of Babylon's prestige. No ancient city was so desired and feared, so admired and humiliated. One of the most famous stories about Babylon is the story of the Tower of Babel, a story that, according to some biblical scholars, may be based on a mistranslation or a brilliant play on words. The book of Genesis tells how those who survived the great flood wanted to build a tower that would reach the heavens, but God punished the builders for their arrogance and scattered them across the earth, where they were forced to speak many different languages. The story comes from a Jewish belief that the name Babylon originated from the Hebrew word meaning confusion or mixing, and from which the English word Babel is derived. Ironically, this interpretation was itself a confusion of languages. In the Akkadian language, the root of the word Babylon does not mean to mix, but gate of the gods. Archaeologists believe that the tower mentioned in the biblical story may be Etemenanki, a giant ziggurat in Babylon, dedicated to Marduk. Its name, which hints at the temple of the foundation of heaven and earth, aligns with the names mentioned in the story. During a survey in 1913, Etemenanki was found to have a height closer to 61 meters, 200 feet, far from the towering structure said to reach the heavens. Another colorful story associated with this ancient city is the legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. There are many theories about the gardens, from their exact location to the identities of their builders. Some suggest the gardens were part of the royal palace in Babylon itself, while others believe they were built in an entirely different city. One origin story claims that Nebuchadnezzar ordered them built for his wife Amytas. So where in the city might these famous gardens have been? Possibly nowhere at all. There is no text from the time of Nebuchadnezzar's tomb that mentions the construction of any such gardens. The Greek historian Herodotus also did not mention them. The only written references come much later from scholars such as Diodorus Siculus, Quintus Curtius, Strabo, and Josephus, who wrote long after Babylon had been abandoned. Inconvenient historical realities have never stopped rulers from reshaping Babylon's history in their own image and creating new myths in the process. One of the boldest examples dates not from antiquity, but from the 1980s, when Saddam Hussein, then the dictator of Iraq, decided to create a reconstruction of its royal palace. Like his predecessors, he left inscriptions on his construction projects. On some bricks, Hussein wrote in Arabic, "Built by Saddam, son of Nebuchadnezzar, to glorify Iraq." Interesting facts about Babylon. The ruler of Babylon had an unusual annual re-election ceremony. He would come to the temple of Marduk, the chief Babylonian deity, and deliver a speech in which he declared that he had done nothing wrong during his reign. At the same time, he knelt while the high priest tore off his regalia, slapped him on the cheeks, and pulled his ears. After this, it was considered that the ruler had passed the test and could continue to reign. The patron of justice in Babylon was the god Shamash. Offenses were described as stepping off the path of Shamash. Babylonian rulers emphasized the divine and therefore unchangeable nature of authority and laws. Thus, Hammurabi, 18th century BC, presented his legislation as something given by Shamash. The division of people into free and powerless was also considered just and derived from the gods. According to the laws of Hammurabi, a slanderer who accused someone of murder without proof faced death. A robber caught in the act was killed on the spot, and a thief who tried to steal someone else's property during a fire was immediately thrown into the flames. Death also awaited a builder if he constructed a house and it collapsed, causing the death of the owner. If the owner's son died, then the builder's son was killed. A son who raised his hand against his father had that hand cut off. A barber who cut off a slave's owner's brand was also punished by having his hand cut off. If a poor man could not repay his debt, he had to give his children into slavery, because a strong man lives by his own hands, while a weak man lives by the hands of his children. The Babylonians called their fields and farmlands the soul of the country. Today, the ruins of Babylon border the Iraqi city of Hilla, located 80 kilometers south of Iraq's capital, Baghdad. One of the most famous structures of Babylon is the Gate of the goddess Ishtar, clad in blue tiles with images of sacred animals, bulls, lions, and dragons, named after the goddess of fertility, love, and war. In 1936, this ancient Babylonian monument was reconstructed and displayed at the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. The Ishtar Gate was one of the 8 gates surrounding Babylon. The processional way passed through it. Each year, during the celebration of the New Year, statues of the gods were carried through it. In the center of the Tower of Babylon stood a statue of the deity Marduk, cast entirely of pure gold, weighing more than 23 tons. According to Herodotus, the Byzantine queen Nitocris changed the course of the Euphrates River to make it more difficult for the Medes to enter the country and learn about its affairs. In the 14th century, BC Babylon was granted the right to self-government. Its inhabitants were freed from state duties and military conscription. The first lunar calendars in history, based on the changes of the moon's phases, appeared in Babylon more than 5,000 years ago. Scales are the oldest measuring instrument. The simplest scales, in the form of a balanced lever, are depicted on Babylonian monuments. In ancient Babylon, a doctor whose actions caused a patient's death had both hands cut off. In ancient Babylon, in the 2nd millennium BC, one of the first libraries was created. It contained manuscripts that described the Great Flood in detail. Sumerians. The Sumerians were a people of southern Mesopotamia whose civilization flourished roughly between 4100 and 1750 BCE. Their name comes from the region often, and incorrectly, called a country. However, Sumer was never a unified political entity, but a region of city-states, each with its own king. The Sumerians themselves simply called their region the land, or the land of the black-headed people. The Sumerians were responsible for many of the most important innovations, inventions, and concepts that are taken for granted today. They essentially invented time, by dividing day and night into 12-hour periods, hours into 60 minutes, and minutes into 60 seconds. Other innovations and inventions include the first schools, the earliest version of the story of the Great Flood, and other biblical narratives, the oldest heroic epic, governmental bureaucracy, monumental architecture, and irrigation methods. Although modern archaeology has established that Uruk is the oldest city in Mesopotamia, the Sumerians themselves believed that the first city in the world was Eridu, governed by their god of wisdom and water, Enki, who raised it from watery marshes and established the concept of kingship and order on earth. The founding of Eridu by Enki was regarded as a type of golden age, comparable to the biblical Garden of Eden, as the home of the gods and the birthplace of the rules governing civilization. During the 19th century CE, European archaeologists traveled to the Middle East in search of ancient cities, tombs, and artifacts. None of them went to Mesopotamia looking for Sumerian cities because no one knew this civilization existed. They sought excavations in places mentioned in the Bible, such as Babylon and Nineveh, as well as a mysterious place called Shinar. But they found far more than they expected. No one knows where the Sumerians came from, but by around 2900 BCE, they were firmly settled in southern Mesopotamia. Sumerian cities, both before and after conquests, prospered through trade. The relative stability of the cities fostered cultural growth, innovation, and invention. The scholar Samuel Noah Cromer, in his landmark work History Begins at Sumer, explores 39 firsts in world history that originated with the Sumerians, including the first schools, the first bicameral Congress, the first historian, the first tax reduction, the first Moses, the first legal precedent, the first Noah, the first messiahs, the first aquarium. The Sumerians also invented the concept of the city, and one contender for the title of oldest city in the world is the Sumerian Uruk. Religion was fully integrated into people's lives and influenced government and social structure. The Sumerians believed that the gods created order from chaos, and the role of humans was to work as collaborators with the gods to prevent chaos from returning. However, the gods themselves later reversed their work, returning the world to chaos when the noise and troubles of humanity became unbearable. The gods expected people to use their lives to maintain order, which included finding ways to cooperate. The Sumerians took great pride in their individuality, as evidenced by the worship of patron deities of each city and the periodic rivalry and conflicts. But the gods required them to set this aside for the common good. Sumerian cities expanded, and when they needed more space and resources, they took them from others. During the Uruk period, culture developed rapidly, and perhaps the greatest invention was the emergence of writing around 3600–3500 BCE. Early writing developed in response to the need for long-distance trade and conveyed basic information such as 2 sheep, 5 goats, Kish, which was clear enough for the sender at the time, but could not tell the receiver whether the 2 sheep and 5 goats were arriving or departing from the city of Kish, whether they were alive or dead, or what their purpose was. This system developed into a writing system by the early dynastic period that produced works such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Hymns to Inanna by Enheduanna, and many other remarkable literary creations. It is believed that the concept of gods living in a city's temple, as well as the form and size of the Sumerian ziggurat, influenced the development of Egyptian pyramids and their beliefs about their own gods. The Sumerian concept of time, as well as their writing system, were also adopted by other civilizations. The Sumerian cylinder seal, a mark of a person's identity, was used in Mesopotamia until about 612 BCE and the fall of the Assyrian Empire. There was literally no sphere of civilization to which the Sumerians did not contribute in some way, but despite all their strengths, their culture began to decline long before its ultimate collapse. The Sumerian civilization collapsed around 1750 BCE due to an Elamite invasion of the region. Shulgi of Ur built a great wall in 2083 BCE to protect his people from such an invasion. But since it was not fortified at both ends, it could be easily bypassed, which is exactly what the invaders did. Despite this, the culture had been struggling to maintain its autonomy ever since the Amorites gained power in Babylon. The shift in cultural influence, visible in many aspects but particularly in the ratio of male to female deities in the Mesopotamian pantheon, occurred with the rise of the Semitic Amorites in Babylon. At the same time, the rights of women, which had traditionally been equal to those of men, declined, as did the great Sumerian cities. Overuse of the land and the expansion of cities, combined with constant conflicts, are cited as major reasons for the fall of the cities. The correlation between the decline of female deities and women's rights has never been properly explained. It is unknown which came first, but it is a telling detail of the decline of a culture that had always highly valued women. The Sumerians today are recognized for their numerous contributions to world culture, but this is quite a recent development. Their history lay buried under the sands for centuries, so any references to them in ancient works were misunderstood by scholars, as there was no known source for those allusions. For example, the land of Shinar in the biblical book of Genesis was thought to be a reference to some region of Mesopotamia, but the meaning of this reference could not be understood until scholars had some idea that there had once existed a place comparable to the land of Sumer, the biblical Shinar. At that time, the Bible, specifically the narratives of the Old Testament, was considered the oldest book in the world and entirely original. The story of the Garden of Eden, the fall of man, and the Great Flood was considered original works written directly by or inspired by the one true God of the Judeo-Christian tradition. Archaeologists and scholars sent on these expeditions were expected to find strong evidence supporting this claim, but instead, they discovered the exact opposite. They found Sumer. Also, here are several short and interesting facts about the Sumerians. The Sumerians invented beer. Beer was a daily beverage, and a recipe has been preserved in the Sumerian Hymn to Ninkasi, the goddess of brewing. They drank it through straws because the drink was thick. The Sumerians invented the wheel. The oldest archaeological wheel finds are from Sumer around 3500 BCE. It was first used for pottery wheels and only later for transportation. The Sumerians had dentists. Tablets describe methods of treating toothaches, including rinses with infusions and magical incantations. Their language is unlike any other. Sumerian is an isolated language, unrelated to any other known language in the world. Akkad and Assyria. Akkad. There are several reasons to consider the year 2350 a turning point in the history of Mesopotamia. For the first time on Mesopotamian soil, an empire emerged. The driving force of this empire was the Akkadians, named after the city of Akkad, which Sargon chose as his capital. It has not yet been identified, but was probably located on the Euphrates between Sippar and Kish. The name Akkad became synonymous with the population group that stood side by side with the Sumerians. During the Akkadian period, the Akkadian language gained literary prestige, which made it equal to Sumerian. Under the influence, possibly, of an Akkadian garrison in Susa, it spread beyond Mesopotamia. After several centuries of the use of local writing systems modeled on cuneiform, Elam adopted Mesopotamian writing. During the Akkadian period, and, with some exceptions, used it even when writing in Elamite, rather than Sumerian or Akkadian. Thus, the reign of the 5 kings of Akkad can be considered one of the most productive periods in Mesopotamian history. Although separatist forces opposed all unifying tendencies, Akkad led to an expansion of political horizons and dimensions. The Akkadian period fascinated historiographers as few other eras did. Having contributed to the treasury of legends, it never disappeared from memory. With such phrases as "a king of the 4 parts of the world will come," the liver omens, divination carried out by analyzing the shape of a sheep's liver, of the old Babylonian period, express a longing for unity at a time when Babylonia had once again broken into a dozen or more small states. The highest official of the state was the Sukalma, literally the supreme messenger, a position that can be described as state chancellor. The empire was divided into about 40 provinces, each governed by a Shensi, who, despite their broad authority, civil administration, and judicial powers, were no longer autonomous, even if only indirectly, although the office was sometimes passed from father to son. They could not independently conclude alliances or wage wars. From an ethnic point of view, Mesopotamia was as heterogeneous at the end of the 3rd millennium as it had been earlier. The Akkadian element predominated, and the ratio of Akkadian speakers to Sumerian speakers continued to shift in favor of the former. Another, indirect but far from insignificant, source of information about the political and socio-economic situation in the 20th–18th centuries BCE is the omen literature. These are long collections in which the condition of a sheep's liver or some other divinatory object, such as the behavior of a drop of oil in a glass filled with water, the appearance of a newborn child, or the shape of rising incense smoke, is described in detail and commented on with a corresponding prediction. The king will kill his officials and distribute their houses and property among the temples. A mighty man will ascend the throne in a foreign city. The land that rebelled against its shepherd will continue to be ruled by this shepherd. The king will depose his chancellor, and they will lock the city gates, and misfortune will come to the city. Assyria. The Assyrian Empire was initially a major regional state in Mesopotamia in the 2nd millennium BCE, but later, in the 1st millennium BCE, under a series of powerful rulers, it grew in size and significance, becoming one of the world's earliest empires. The empire began modestly with the city of Ashur, known to the Sumerians as Subatu, located in Mesopotamia northeast of Babylon, where merchants trading in Anatolia became increasingly wealthy, and this wealth contributed to the growth and prosperity of the city. According to one interpretation of passages from the biblical book of Genesis, Ashur was founded by a man named Ashur, the son of Shem, the son of Noah, after the great flood, who then founded other important Assyrian cities. A more likely version is that the city was named Ashur after the deity of the same name sometime in the 3rd millennium BCE. The name of that same god is the origin of the word Assyria. The biblical version of Ashur's origin appears later in historical records. The book of Genesis is dated to approximately 1450 BCE or no, earlier than the 5th century BCE, and seems to have been accepted by the Assyrians after they adopted Christianity. The Assyrians were a Semitic people who initially spoke and wrote the Akkadian language before the easier-to-use Aramaic language became more popular. Historians divide the rise and fall of the Assyrian Empire into 3 periods: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Empire, and the Late Empire, also known as the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Although it should be noted that Assyrian history continued beyond that point. Assyrians still live in regions of Iran and northern Iraq, as well as in other places. The Assyrian Empire is considered the largest of the Mesopotamian empires due to its size and the development of bureaucracy and military strategies that allowed it to grow and prosper. Although the city of Ashur had existed since the 3rd millennium BCE, the preserved ruins of this city date to 1900 BCE, which is now considered the date of its founding. According to early inscriptions, the first king was Tudia, and those who followed him were known as kings who lived in tents, indicating a pastoral rather than an urban community. Ashur was certainly an important trading center even at this time, although its exact shape and structure are unclear. The wealth derived from trade in Karam Kanesh provided the people of Ashur with the stability and security needed to expand the city, thus laying the foundation for the rise of the empire. Trade with Anatolia was equally important for supplying the Assyrians with raw materials from which they could develop their craft of ironworking. The iron weapons of the Assyrian military would become a decisive advantage in the campaigns that would conquer the entire Near Eastern region. However, before that could happen, the political landscape had to change. Adad Nirari I was the first Assyrian king whose accomplishments are known with certainty, as he left inscriptions describing his achievements that have survived mostly intact. Additionally, letters between the Assyrian king and Hittite rulers have also survived, clearly showing that at first the Assyrian rulers were not taken seriously by other peoples of the region until they proved too powerful to resist. Adad-nirari, I completely subdued Mitanni and initiated what would become standard policy in the Assyrian Empire: the deportation of large segments of the population. When Mitanni came under Assyrian control, Adad-nirari, I decided that the best way to prevent any future rebellion was to drive out the former inhabitants of the land and replace them with Assyrians. The deported were carefully selected for their abilities and sent to regions that could make the best use of their talents. Not every member of the conquered population was chosen for deportation, and families were never separated. Those populations that actively resisted the Assyrian presence were killed or sold into slavery, but the general population was absorbed into the growing empire and considered Assyrian. The late empire, also known as the Neo-Assyrian Empire, is the most familiar to scholars of ancient history, as it marks the period of the empire's greatest expansion. It is also the era that most decisively gave the Assyrian Empire its reputation for ruthlessness and brutality. Although the reputation for decisive, ruthless military tactics is understandable, the comparison with the Nazi regime is less so. Unlike the Nazis, the Assyrians treated the conquered peoples they resettled well, as already noted above, and considered them Assyrians as soon as they submitted to central authority. There was no concept of a master race in Assyrian policy. Everyone was considered a valuable asset to the empire, regardless of whether they were born Assyrian or assimilated into the culture. The Assyrian army was most successful in siege warfare and was likely the first force to have a separate corps of engineers. Assault was their primary tactic against the heavily fortified cities of the Near East. They developed a great variety of methods for breaking through enemy walls. Sappers were used to undermine walls or light fires beneath wooden gates, and ramps were built so that troops could cross over ramparts or attempt to break through the upper part of the wall where it was least thick. Mobile ladders allowed attackers to cross moats and quickly assault any point in the defenses. These operations were covered by masses of archers who formed the backbone of the infantry. But the pride of the Assyrian siege train were their machines. These were multi-story wooden towers with 4 wheels and a turret on top, with 1 and sometimes 2 battering rams at the base. After the decline and collapse of the Assyrian Empire, Babylon took dominance in the region from 605 to 549 BCE. Then Babylon fell into the hands of the Persians under the rule of Cyrus the Great, who founded the Achaemenid Empire, 549–330 BCE, which then passed to Alexander the Great, and, after his death, became part of the Seleucid Empire. Atlantis. According to the bibliography, to date, more than 20,000 scientific works and adventure stories have been written about Atlantis, the mysterious continent buried somewhere at the bottom of the ocean. Over 1,700 hypotheses have been put forward regarding its location and the reasons for its disappearance without a trace. But did it really disappear without a trace? In the dialogues of the ancient thinker Plato, there is still a grain of truth that suggests the reality of the legendary island. For more than 2,000 years, the legend of Atlantis has lived on. But only a few decades ago, people who had lost hope of finding traces of a once flourishing state began to classify Plato's works as utopias. And now, a sensational turn. Today, some historians and archaeologists have acknowledged that the dialogues of Plato do indeed contain a grain of real facts. Plato's version. As is well known, a true discovery requires that all elements of the physical description be present and that all of them appear in the given order. In this case, if any of the clues given to us by Plato are missing, the elements are not arranged in the correct order, or the chronology does not match the chronology set forth by Plato, then all of it is merely speculation. The book Atlantis, The Find of a Lifetime, tells the story of a 10,000-year journey that effectively uncovers the sunken island of Atlantis and demonstrates how Plato's 2,400-year-old account corresponds to real history. Not only do the physical characteristics of the proposed location, together with the given chronology, fit Plato's description, but all elements appear exactly in the same order in which Plato depicted them in his story. Unlike previous research, the 6-year investigation of the book began with deliberately adhering to the correct chronology of 9600 BCE, because without the given chronology, there could be no perfect match. Incidentally, starting with the correct chronology was the key to solving this puzzle, as is also noted in coastal and marine geospatial technologies. If Atlantis ever existed, its disappearance may not be related to tectonic causes, a sudden submersion, but to eustatic ones, marine transgression. Indeed, as Plato noted, the end of Atlantis came later, at a certain point in time, and after a series of prolonged ominous earthquakes and floods in the plural. The sudden rise in sea level became the flood that submerged the island. The entire island's flat terrain became impassable and impenetrable. And as Plato explained, this was caused by the sinking of the island. Of course, knowing nothing about the natural forces acting upon it, Plato misinterpreted the rise in sea level and called it the gradual submergence of the island. However, although Plato misunderstood what had actually happened, he described the natural catastrophe that ultimately erased our early history. As for the inhabitants of this prehistoric island, recent DNA studies conducted by the University of Washington and others have shown that after the Mediterranean sea level began to rise, in order to avoid flooding, some of these people migrated as far as the island of Crete, re-establishing themselves as the Minoan civilization, while others migrated to the nearby Peloponnese, shortly afterward emerging as the Mycenaeans. In conclusion, it seems that Plato treated Atlantis in the same way that Homer treated Troy several centuries earlier. He based his story of Atlantis on a real location and a prehistoric civilization known to the ancient Greeks which Plato chose to use to best express his philosophical narrative: the divine versus the human, ideal societies versus corrupt ones. Plato's knowledge that the Minoans were the descendants of those he called the Atlanteans allowed him to present this people from their earliest beginnings around 9600 BCE to their final destruction by the mainland Greeks around 1500 BCE. He depicted the super island of the Cycladic Plateau, or the island of Atlantis, if you will, before it was submerged by rising seas. He described the aggressive nature of the Atlanteans toward their Mediterranean neighbors and others. As for everyday details and their way of life, Plato chose to use aspects from the much later period of their history, the Minoan era. Hence today's confusion on the issue. In the end, he correctly reported their incredible abilities and the unconscious genetic contribution to history they made by crossing the Atlantic through the passage from island to island. To debunk most other theories, a careful reading of Plato's text makes it clear that he was speaking about a prehistoric place in the Mediterranean, a land of skilled seafarers capable of traveling from island to island to another continent through the Strait of Gibraltar. DNA studies today also definitively confirm that an ancient Mediterranean civilization reached North America within the chronology given to us by Plato. On the other hand, no known American haplogroups A, B, C, or D have been found in prehistoric Europe that would justify an eastward advance from the west. This again shows that the belief that Atlantis was somewhere in the Atlantic and advanced toward those located in the Mediterranean is a false notion based on erroneous interpretations of Plato's text. The Minoan name is only a nickname given to this civilization by Sir Arthur Evans when he found their ruins on the island of Crete. No one knows for certain what their true name was. However, the Egyptians who originated this story and Plato could very well have known that the Minoans and the Atlanteans were actually one and the same people. If so, was Plato's explanation necessary for future generations to present his story? In fact, no. Plato ultimately describes this specific region and explains that after the cycle of floods finally ended, the mountain tops of the island remained above water and formed small islands. Poetically, he compared these remaining islets to the bones of a wasted body of the land that once existed there. The consequence is that, compared with what then existed, only the bones of the wasted body are left on the small islands, as they may be called, all the richer and softer parts of the soil having fallen away, and the mere skeleton of the country being left. However, his description did not end there. He went further and dramatically described the transformation of the surrounding environment of the Aegean Sea between 9000 BCE and his own time. Nearly 7 millennia later, he explained that the mountains, once thickly forested and supplying timber large enough to cover even the greatest houses, had transformed into small islets that could barely provide food for bees. This is another important piece of information in which Plato brilliantly illustrates the complete transformation of the region and explains how the once large green islands of the Aegean Sea 10,000 years ago eventually became the small dry islands we know today. If Plato was crafting an ideological story around real circumstances and a prehistoric civilization that managed to survive into the Bronze Age, which the Greeks eventually conquered, then to successfully express some of his philosophical ideas, the divine versus the human, ideal societies versus the corrupted, he needed details that his Greek audience would be more familiar with. Greek names, Greek gods, orichalcum, etc. Could his ideological story have interested his audience if they could not relate to it or associate it with themselves? Geological hypotheses. To answer this question, it is necessary to examine the works of the author who introduced the theme of Atlantis, and to study his data about the region and the time he specified. During his journey to Egypt, the Greek statesman Solon receives information from the priests of the Temple of Neith in the city of Sais that the history of the Egyptians goes back 8,000 years. According to this information, the descendants of the Egyptian people originated from a goddess who fled from a country called Atlantis and reached Egypt as a result of the flooding of her homeland in the sea. The Greeks, however, know only 1,000 years of their past. Solon asks the priests to tell him what they know about the past of humanity. They tell Solon what was passed down to them by this goddess. Solon passed this historical information to the grandfather of Critias. Plato, in turn, wrote the story of Atlantis using this data passed down to him from his grandfather. In the dialogues Timaeus and Critias, Plato wrote that the names in all the data transmitted by the Egyptian priests were changed by applying them to the conditions of Greece. Our world experienced an ice age lasting from 115,000 to 15,000 years ago. And during the ice ages, the geography of the Earth was as shown on the map. In the northern regions of America, Europe, and Asia, there existed an ice cap 2.5 kilometers thick. Since glaciers form as a result of water evaporating from the seas and accumulating on land as snow and ice, sea levels become sufficiently low to match the volume of glaciers on land. This means a sea level drop of about 130 meters. Thus, the seas retreated from the coastal zone, known as the continental shelf, and shallow marine environments transformed into land. Therefore, people who lived on this plain during the Ice Age up until 15,000 years ago experienced constant migration between 14,000 and 7,000 years ago. This is because it took this much time for the Persian Gulf to fill. It is understood from archaeological data that the region of the Fertile Crescent is at the beginning of the location where people fleeing the plain migrated. The culture created by the people of Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe 11 and 12,000 years ago clearly shows that they had experience in socialization earlier. The Sumerians were the first people to share information about their past by creating written documents. On these clay tablets with written letters, they wrote that they came from the sea to the land of the two rivers. Since people could not live in the sea, it always remained a mystery where the Sumerians came from when they reached the region of Basra. This was because, until 15,000 years ago, It was not known that the sea had completely retreated from the Persian Gulf and turned into an alluvial plain during the Ice Age. The most important of the clay tablets, known as Sumerian cuneiform, which has survived unchanged and not destroyed to this day, is the King List. On this prismatic tablet, it is written who ruled their society as kings in the past. They divided their history into two separate periods: A. Before the flood, and B. After the flood. In the pre-flood period, they lived in 5 different cities. It is stated that over time, the cities sank and the vessel of kingship was transferred to another place. It is written that after the great flood, the last city sank, and after this flood, life continued with new kingdoms around Basra. During this long ice age, some people who reached the Basra-Hormuz plain lived on islands of a lake located near the Strait of Hormuz. The deepest point in the Persian Gulf is 90 meters. Let us call this lake, which does not exist today, the Atlas Lake. There are many islands in the lake because in the bedrock layers of the Basra-Hormuz region, there are layers of anhydrite, and when they absorb water and swell, mounds in the form of salt domes appear. For this reason, throughout the Basra-Hormuz plain, there are many mounds that would form islands during the rise of the seas. The Sumerians came to the vicinity of Basra after the flood, and the tablet emphasizes that they came to the region of the 2 rivers from the sea. Archaeological findings show that the Sumerians arrived in the Basra region about 6,000 years ago. The Sumerian tablets were written by Sumerian thinkers, scribes, after the Sumerians landed in the Basra region and invented writing 5,500 years ago. Archaeological data show that the society called the Sumerians emerged around Basra about 6,500 years ago and founded city-states 500 years ago. In other words, when the Sumerians arrived in the Basra region, they did not immediately create a system called a state, owned and governed from above, but created sacred kingdoms many years later. If we summarize the above data, the following situation arises. Humanity took its first step in the transition from wilderness to civilized life on the Basra-Hormuz plain. In the part of the Basra-Hormuz plain, near the Strait of Hormuz, there is a large lake that can be called the Atlas Lake. And in this lake, there are islands. This lake is located in the inner part of the Strait of Hormuz, which opens into the Indian Ocean. In this Atlas Lake, there are islands from which one can pass to one another and to the vast surrounding plain. To the north of the lake lies a very large mountain range, the Zagros Mountains, which protects the islands and the plain from northern winds. This high mountain range extends into the sea like a tongue near the Strait of Hormuz. Next to it flows the Tigris-Euphrates River. With the end of the Ice Age, the glaciers on the peaks of the Zagros Mountains began to melt, and floods occurred every year. Since melting snow and the soil under the glacial cover mixed with the floods together with the waters, the mountain slopes remained bare. The muddy floods that continued each year eventually filled the Atlas Lake and turned it into a swamp. Around the lake, there is a rectangular plain measuring 800 × 200 kilont. Water channels were opened to supply water to all parts of this plain. Since the plain is an alluvial plain, all kinds of plants can grow there abundantly. 14,000 years ago, when the sea began to refill the plain again, the people on the plain began to flee. The above paragraphs were prepared in accordance with modern geological and archaeological data, the language spoken by the inhabitants of Atlantis. To understand what the future of the people of Atlantis was like, it is enough to know what language they spoke in their past. After all, comparisons can be made with the languages spoken by people scattered throughout our world. Since humanity originated in East Africa, it is expected that the language spoken in this region would continue to be spoken in the places of migration. In fact, studies have shown that the oldest languages are found in Central and Southern Africa, and that other languages are closely related to the migration routes of Homo sapiens, who spread from Africa throughout the world, as demonstrated by the analysis of 504 world languages in terms of phonetic complexity. The main feature of agglutinative languages is that the word Odadakilerdensin transforms into a sentence like, "You are one of the people from the room," in the Indo-European languages, which are a fragmented language group. Now let us show how widespread in the world is the language of a people living in a very distant Asian region, such as Japan, and languages with similar structure and connections with Turkish. A native Turkish speaker and someone learning Japanese, Selçuk Yilmaz, who works as a programmer in the USA, showed that there are structural similarities between Japanese and Turkish. For example, the word order is almost identical. Compared to English, the difference is striking. The grammar is also somewhat similar to Turkish. Since both are agglutinative languages, they have the same logic. The last representatives of the Atlanteans who landed on the shores of Basra were the Sumerians, and from their written documents, it is understood that the Sumerians used an agglutinative language. Therefore, the Atlanteans probably used an agglutinative language. Thus, the people who fled the plain of Atlantis and spread into Europe and Asia probably had an agglutinative language. In fact, it has been noticed that the people who crossed the borders into America through Asia have agglutinative languages. For example, among the Quechua peoples who live in the Peruvian Andes and the mountainous regions of South America, a fully agglutinative language is spoken, Makachinakukan. They allow each other to hit. As shown in the previous section, the inhabitants of the plain were the first to leave the Atlantis plain, since each year the sea began to cover a very large coastline of the plain, which was flat. The people on this coastline also began to flee. Where could the people of the Atlantis plain, forced to migrate due to the end of the Ice Age because of the disturbance of the sea waters, have migrated? The answer is very obvious. Although the end of the Ice Age makes the Atlantis plain uninhabitable, it also transforms previously uninhabitable places such as Anatolia, Europe, and Asia into habitable environments. These places became the new homeland of the peoples of Atlantis. Mythological interpretations. Recently, I watched an episode of the National Geographic series, Is It Real?, about Atlantis. An interview was conducted with two pseudo-scholars, one of whom believed that the inhabitants of Atlantis were aliens who thousands of years ago traveled through a stargate to Earth and created an advanced civilization that became the beginning of all human ones. The other believed that Atlantis was once located in the Caribbean Sea and was the progenitor of the ancient Central and South American civilizations. Many others have theories about where and when Atlantis was, including classical scholars who refer to ancient catastrophes that destroyed the Minoan civilization on Crete or the Phoenician Gates or Tartessus. Some believers interviewed in the film referred to Egyptian hieroglyphs that seemed to depict spaceships. This reminded me of Erich von Däniken's book, Chariots of the Gods, first published in 1968. It was an attempt to explain religious miracles and ancient civilizations as having arisen thanks to visits from technologically advanced aliens. The evidence, whatever it was, seemed to be reproductions of ancient sculptures and carvings that looked like modern inventions. All this resembles a religion for technologically obsessed, overly rational, but superstitious people of the 20th century. It also shows that myth-making is still an important function of the human mind. Many books have been written about Atlantis, and interest in it still seems strong, taking on aspects of faith for some modern believers. Despite all this, the story of Atlantis is actually only an illustration of one of the theses in Plato's philosophical work. Everything we really know about Atlantis comes from Plato. However, those who try to prove the existence of Atlantis rarely speak about Plato or Greek philosophy at all. Modern myths, stargates, and aliens. Could the gods have been aliens? Theories about Atlantis associated with beings from space belong to the type of theories that, I believe, are called diffusionist. This occurs in anthropology and asserts that great discoveries tend to occur rarely but spread to neighboring territories rather than being made independently in many centers. In fact, this is not a problem, since human history has many examples of both diffusion and the independent creation of new ideas. It is somewhat like the so-called conflict between nature and nurture. For example, whether femininity is a product of genetic or social conditioning. Since all women experience both, the question cannot be answered. But for the theorists of Atlantis, everything comes from a single place: space. It seems, is always technological devices or engineering achievements, not cultural creations, language, social organization, or works of art. The basic assumptions are that advanced civilizations are technologically complex. Early human ones are not. Our own industrial civilization is imperfect, yet somewhere on another planet, some race must have done everything right and invented an air-conditioned Garden of Eden. This was the dream of the Industrial Revolution at the dawn of the 20th century, that people would now live as gods. How wrong can one be? But perhaps somewhere out there, surely there is a grain of truth in these ideas. In astrology, It is that all our environment affects us, including the astronomical. According to the idea of gods as astronauts, there is undoubtedly something in the universe beyond what we can imagine, and other intelligent species with a different consciousness may exist somewhere nearby and approach. But the idea of cultural diffusion from a single center, extraterrestrial or not, once popular among anthropologists, has been displaced by many discoveries. It probably originates from the 18th and early 19th century European belief that humankind was invented once in 4004 BC by God and spread to many countries from the Garden of Eden. The idea that human civilization is a gift from aliens is, after all, a version of biblical fundamentalism. God, of course, is by definition an extraterrestrial. Discoveries in genetics, microbiology, DNA analysis, plate tectonics, and the traces of the slow transformation from hunter-gatherer to agricultural and urban dweller, observed through the analysis of food use and the study of seed evolution, have allowed us to see human history as the complex and tangled evolution it actually was. When Maxime Duchamp photographed the ruined statue of Ramses II buried in the sands of Luxor in 1850, his contemporaries were ready to believe it was magical and probably came from mysterious sources. How could such engineering and artistic marvels, such a mighty civilization, have arisen in the backward and primitive region that Cairo was at the time? In the racist thinking of those days, this made ancient Egyptian culture as advanced, almost, as the white civilization that was then engaged in plundering the countries of Asia and Africa. Unfortunately, the idea of a single source, whether extraterrestrial or not, has some difficulties that need to be overcome. If Egypt was founded by gods from space, then what about the stop and start achievement in Iraq from even earlier times? And what about the Shang dynasty in China, or the Mohenjo-Daro civilization, or in Cambodia? More gods? If the pyramids require an explanation in South and Central America and Egypt without power tools, then what about Chartres Cathedral, built by anonymous craftsmen with hand tools for the glory of God? Pretty soon, you would have to postulate countless visits from aliens all over the world and throughout all of history, not just Egypt or South America in ancient times. Perhaps the gargoyles on the upper level of Chartres are their self-portraits. Perhaps the entire progress of civilization was masterminded by the devil in his dreadful scheme to destroy humanity. Either way, many beginnings from many centers, and if gods or aliens are involved, then the earth must have been overcrowded with them for centuries. The problem with those who believed in the civilization in Egypt or Central and South America that I saw in the documentary, and believed that the civilization in Egypt or Central and South America can be explained by Atlantis, or those who believed Atlantis can be explained by aliens, is that they were looking for evidence, and the evidence they had was hopelessly subjective. For example, hieroglyphs that looked like spaceships and defied explanation in the inscriptions, as Egyptologists showed, were formed by adding the name of another pharaoh to an existing one, with two cartouches merging due to weathering of the stone, forming what outwardly looked like a spaceship, but could still be read as the signatures of two historical pharaohs from the time when the inscriptions were made, to say, well, it looks like a spaceship to me, can be countered with, well, it doesn't look like a spaceship to me. And nothing at all is proven. There are many stars in the universe, and the farther we look, the more we find. There must be many planets, many of them suitable for life of some form. However incredible it may be, some forms of life might evolve into an advanced civilization, although whether we would recognize it if we saw it is debatable. I have no issue with this concept. But there is another problem. Us. We have a 3,000-year history of reacting to various forms of life. We shoot it, we burn it at the stake, infect it, exploit it, torture it. Crime, we have a different one. So, if aliens ever arrived on Earth with an advanced civilization, we would not learn to build pyramids from them. We would be chopping and burning them until none were left. We are still at this stage of development. Let's hope we overcome it before aliens actually arrive here. Faith in aliens must be strong. Steven Spielberg made a fortune of it in 1982. Sooner or later, you have to stop and acknowledge it. You are not explaining human civilization. You are illustrating the human tendency to create myths, vivid, poetic ideas, trying to deal with the limits of our understanding of ourselves and our world. The myth of the fall. The inhabitants of Atlantis are not only considered aliens, they are said to have been a great civilization that was destroyed. This goes back to Plato's story. It told of a great civilization that became corrupt and was destroyed by Zeus. Prehistorians have discovered many civilizations that were destroyed. We know of Minoan Crete, possibly Tartessus in Spain. We can see the ruins of Egypt, the ruins of temples called megaliths in England and Malta, the barrows or mounds of the Celts. Older civilizations have passed. In cities like Rome or Athens, people walk every day past the mysterious ruins of once powerful civilizations. The connection between bad deeds and punishment is found in our own culture and comes from a Near Eastern source. The story of the Garden of Eden. In fact, the Bible contains several so-called prototypes of the story of Atlantis, a great civilization that acted wickedly and was destroyed. Adam and Eve were given paradise, and they were to be granted immortality, freedom from death and disease. But they rebelled against God. Do you notice the really small role of the serpent in this story? By identifying him with the devil, it is said that he tempted Eve. But earlier, God himself tempted both Adam and Eve by forbidding them to eat the fruit. The serpent only tells Eve what God had already told her before. Human nature does everything else, and paradise is lost. But we remember it. Another story in the Bible tells how a civilization was destroyed by a flood sent by God because humanity had sinned. Then there was Sodom and Gomorrah. God continually destroyed humanity because of their sins. However, this does not seem to have stopped us from sinning. Here, it may be noted that in the Sumerian original of the flood story, told 2,000 years before the Jews existed as a people, there is only a flood. The Jews added sins and punishment when they created their version of the story. And with this, we conclude our journey through the most mysterious civilizations, myths, and traces of the past. If you enjoyed this voyage into the depths of history, support the channel by subscribing. This is the best way to show that you're interested in such large-scale explorations. Write in the comments which mysteries or civilizations you want to hear about next. Your ideas often lead me to the most unexpected topics. And that's exactly what motivates me to continue. Thank you for being with me. Ahead lies even more history, mysteries, and discoveries. See you in the next video.